Sheldon Baker, and thank you for watching. My guest today is Marc Ross, and he is an attorney. He's not your ordinary attorney. He provides counsel, he provides consulting in the cannabis and hemp industries, and he's going to tell us a little bit about ESG. What's ESG? Don't go away. After this word, an important word, he'll tell us. Come on back.
Not all hemp oils are created equal. Let Verdent Oasis show you why. Verdent Oasis is a vertically integrated hemp-centric raw material grower, manufacturer, and supplier. We oversee every step from soil to oil. Verdent strains are genotyped and registered by government-regulated seed banks. Our operations are HACCP and GMP certified by SGS International. Verdent Oasis has the most comprehensive global safety dossier for hemp extract, setting the benchmark for FDA acceptance and NDI compliance, the gateway to the food and beverage industry. Our hemp oil ingredients are accepted and authorized by the FDA, USDA, and DEA for interstate commerce throughout the United States. In the UK and EU, our extract is authorized as a novel food. Wholesome and pure, backed by science, legally compliant, and fully integrated with a dedicated innovation center to serve your unique marketing objectives. To learn more about the Verdent difference, visit our website at www.verdentoasis.com. Verdent Oasis, the essence of hemp.
Marc Ross, and Marc is the head of Impact and ESG and the co-chair of the Environmental Health and Safety Practice Group at the Denver-based legal firm of Vicente Sederberg LLP. Marc, welcome.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Sheldon. I'm excited to be here.
Great. ESG. What does ESG mean? Everybody's dying to know.
Well, ESG is an acronym. It stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. And in essence, it's a body of practices that corporations use to manage their affairs in those areas. So environmental is typically everything that touches their air impacts, their water impacts, their climate impacts, waste, pesticide usage in the cannabis space, packaging, anything that touches on environmental. Social really touches on the people. So it's everything from worker health and safety to how a company interfaces with the community in which they operate. Strategic philanthropy, community engagement, employee engagement, and then governance are the rules and ways that a company manages itself. So it's everything from board diversity to policies around anti-slavery, anti-child labor, to where they invest their money, how they govern themselves with regard to lobbying, and those sorts of things. And this is becoming a growing area. It's a very analytical area because the idea is to measure one's ES&G so that way you can put all kinds of stakeholders on notice about the impacts, both good and bad, that your company is having.
So you've been able to create a nice little niche for yourself in the environmental aspect of what you do, and certainly in this case, cannabis and CBD and some of the other areas. How'd you get into it?
It's interesting. I've been an environmental attorney for nearly 30 years in the public, private, nonprofit sectors. And when I decided to pivot my career for the second time to return to the private sector after a long stint in the nonprofit sector, I decided I wanted to do the nonprofit-y stuff, the community building, the employee engagement, the strategic philanthropy, sustainability, leaning into my environmental law background. And a couple key people in 2016 said, you really should look at the cannabis industry. There's not much of that going on in a very strategic ROI, return on investment driven way. And sure enough, I poked around and I had a passion for the plant and a passion for the industry. And I found that there was an opportunity there for me to bring, at that time, 20 plus years of environmental legal experience and community building into the cannabis space to really professionalize this area known as corporate social responsibility. And sure enough, there was that opening, and people started to get me to speak about it and write about it. And then a large multi-state cannabis company hired me in 2019 to strategize and scale nationally their corporate social responsibility program. And away I went.
So specifically when you talk about ESG and cannabis, what does that really mean? Are companies really focusing on it, or do you have to guide them?
Well, let's just say there's two kinds of companies. The smaller companies that are recognizing that there are advantages to be gained by starting to get a handle on their environmental impacts, how they treat people in the communities in which they operate, the S, and also to tighten up their governance practices because either they're looking for additional licensing opportunities, or they're looking to attract talent, retain talent, they have pain points in the community, or they're looking for investment dollars. So you've got smaller companies that are just starting to build programs around these areas. And then you've got larger companies that are recognizing, because they are publicly traded, or because they have greater exposures, or because there's institutional investors that are starting to take a look at them, or potential exit strategies to be bought by a non-cannabis company. They know that they need to start to measure analytically these same areas. And so that's kind of what ESG looks like in the cannabis space. It's programmatic for the most part for most companies, but the larger companies are starting to measure their impact from an analytical standpoint so they can report it to a wide variety of stakeholders.
So you've been quoted as saying there's a perfect storm brewing around ESG in the cannabis industry. How so?
Yeah, I've said the industry is really in the eye of a hurricane right now, without so much as an umbrella when it comes to ESG. Investors, as I just alluded to, are starting to ask questions around ESG. And so you've got them pushing on companies to start to measure and report their ESG. You've got a mostly millennial workforce and a mostly millennial customer base based on the latest statistics that have been gathered around the industry. And we know millennials are driven by purpose, and they're driven by companies that are engaged in sustainable practices and treat both people and planet well. And so they want to work for those companies, and they want to support those companies. So you've got consumers, customers, investors, and then you also have governmental entities. In Europe, it's now required that companies start to measure their ESG and report it. Canada is talking about it, and the SEC is getting ready to roll out climate disclosure requirements for all publicly traded companies. So you've got this perfect storm of various stakeholders pushing on this very new industry to start to measure and report their environmental, social, and governance metrics.
So all of these areas of ESG that you've talked about, does that add another layer of cost to the price of the product when the consumer goes into a dispensary to buy whatever it is they're buying?
Actually, what we've noticed is that companies that really demonstrate their ESG and dig into this and start to measure are actually able to save money. So sustainable practices, LED lighting, waste recycling, waste reuse, waste reduction, water reduction, pesticide reduction, all the different environmental elements can actually save a company money. And usually the return on investment is much quicker in a cannabis operation than you'll see in other large-scale, say, consumer packaged goods operations, where it could be a 10-year ROI on sustainable practices. And in cannabis, we're seeing 1 to 3 years. On social, we're finding that companies that really dig into the social aspects are better operated in terms of having a diverse workforce. We know that companies that have a diverse workforce, have a diversity of thought, are able to attract a different talent and more high quality talent, are able to retain them longer, which saves money as well. And then companies that have governance practices in place are better run companies. And investors see that because they have these policies in place, which reduces the cost of capital for those companies. So, and then there's, of course, all the marketing aspects for companies that have more sustainable practices, better social impact, better run companies from a governance standpoint. Those companies can then be marketed and can ask for higher pricing. I mean, just think of consumer packaged goods, think about organic. They can ask for more money for their products, and people will pay more money for those products because of these other bells and whistles that are important to consumers these days.
Yeah, great. So you're originally from the great state of Pennsylvania, I believe, and then you came out to the great state of Colorado. Was it the cannabis industry that brought you out to Denver and to Colorado?
It was not the cannabis industry. I came out to Colorado from the Commonwealth, one of 3 Commonwealths in the country, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In 2004, I had just founded, over a course of a part-time 2-year period, a national environmental nonprofit. We had finally received our tax-exempt status. One of my co-founders was in Colorado. My wife and I loved Colorado. We loved the whole outdoor lifestyle, and it seemed like a much better place for an environmental advocacy organization than Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I was at the time.
And so then you became affiliated with Vicente Sederberg. Was that part of the plan?
You know, it wasn't part of the plan. When I started to do the pivot into the cannabis industry in 2016, early in that process, I finally got to Christian Sederberg and told him my vision for the industry and what I wanted to bring to the industry. And by the end of that meeting, which was right before Christmas, he had opened his Rolodex and made 10 connections for me back in 2016. And then when I was interviewing for the role at Harvest Health and Recreation, folks here at the firm put in a good word for me as well. This firm has always been supportive of what my passion is, which is elevating this industry with regard to these issues that are near and dear to me. And so when the opportunity earlier last year, in the spring of last year, happened, and Vicente Sederberg said they wanted to create this new practice, they called me and brought me in. And so now it's good. They've been friends for years, and now I'm part of the family.
Are there a lot of firms doing or offering the services that your group does?
None in the cannabis industry. There are certainly large firms. ESG really started to make its way onto the legal scene out of what's called the Magic Circle law firms out of London, the large international law firms, where they started to realize, especially where ESG connected into finance and financial reporting requirements and accounting. So you have the large law firms that have those types of business services, and then the large Big Four accounting firms, and some of the smaller accounting firms as well that are not the Big Four, have ESG practices. But that hasn't been the case in the cannabis industry until now.
So you think it's a good move? You seem to be pretty excited about what you do.
You know, I love what I'm able to do because I'm able to have this impact on this nascent industry. You know, a lot of smaller cannabis companies don't know that they even need this. But if they're looking to sell, or they're looking for an exit to a larger company, or if they're a large company and they realize, oh, man, we need to get our house in order because investors are demanding it or because the government is going to require it, there's lots of blue sky for us to operate in to help those companies really start to get up to speed, whether it's building a more diverse workforce for them, starting to measure their environmental impact, or starting to tell their story in a way that's different and differentiates them from just your average cannabis company.
Fantastic. Good. Well, we're going to take a short break here. We come back, we'll talk more about ESG, not to be confused with MSG, and we'll be back with Marc Ross, so stick around, everyone.
Not all hemp oils are created equal. Let Verdant Oasis show you why. Verdant Oasis is a vertically integrated hemp-centric raw material grower, manufacturer, and supplier. We oversee every step from soil to oil. Verdant strains are genotyped and registered by government-regulated seed banks. Our operations are HACCP and GMP certified by SGS International. Verdant Oasis has the most comprehensive global safety dossier for hemp extract, setting the benchmark for FDA acceptance and NDI compliance, the gateway to the food and beverage industry. Our hemp oil ingredients are accepted and authorized by the FDA, USDA, and DEA for interstate commerce throughout the United States. In the UK and EU, our extract is authorized as a novel food. Wholesome and pure, backed by science, legally compliant, and fully integrated with a dedicated innovation center to serve your unique marketing objectives. To learn more about the Verdent difference, visit our website at www.verdentoasis.com. Verdent Oasis, the essence of hemp.
Welcome back. We're talking to Marc Ross on the 420 area code. Marc is an attorney with Vicente Sederberg. You know, I think you alluded to what excites you, maybe, or about what you do. But if you could narrow it down to one thing, what really excites you about what you do in your role?
I think the most exciting thing about this role in this firm is that Vicente Sederberg is the leading law firm in the cannabis industry. It's been around for 12 years now. It was part of the legalization of cannabis here in the state of Colorado. The firm touches pretty much every major player in the cannabis, hemp, and psychedelic space. So there's a lot of opportunity for me to bring this passion to create better businesses, across those industries. And so the most exciting thing for me is that I get to help create a more ethical and sustainable business or industry, if you will. And so that's the most exciting thing for me. And I get to do things like be the assistant chair to the United States Cannabis Council's Environmental Stewardship Committee, and I get to sit on the City of Denver's Cannabis Sustainability Working Group, and I get asked to speak at a lot of opportunities. I get a lot of speaking opportunities because of the reputation that Vicente Sederberg has. So it gives me a huge platform and a huge megaphone to talk about these issues about which I'm so passionate.
So you're the ESG maven, huh? We could call you that, huh?
I am an ESG maven. There are a few of us out there now in the cannabis space, but it is still a very small club of folks that actually know ESG. There are a lot of companies out there that will title something ESG, but it's really programmatic. It's really corporate social responsibility, and so we're really on the leading edge of bringing ESG to an industry that desperately needs it.
Do you yourself do any work, global work, or is it just all here in the States?
My work right now at Vicente Sederberg is just in the States. I've worked globally in the environmental legal world, though.
Great. Okay. I don't know if you really touched on this, but in your mind, what does the ideal ESG program look like for a cannabis company or a CBD company, and is there a difference?
No difference. Same plant, different name, different products, but the practice would look the same for both, and that would be companies would have very thoughtful metrics around ESG. So, for example, they would be measuring their environmental impacts. They would be taking a look and measuring their social impacts. They would be starting to implement governance policies that they can measure. They would be reporting all of that to a third-party framework. So when I mention a third-party framework, there are a number of them out there. It's an alphabet soup right now. It's slowly consolidating because, frankly, both the regulators at the federal level as well as the investment world are all consolidating these various frameworks. So they go by names such as SASB, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, or TCFD, or the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. There's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are all these different frameworks out there that are slowly but surely consolidating. And I think when the SEC issues their climate reporting requirements, they're going to have some conglomerate of these standards. Europe is starting to have a conglomerate of these standards, which are really built around accounting and disclosure for investors. And so I think when cannabis companies start to report against these these frameworks and start to publish how they perform against these frameworks, and you can start to compare a cannabis company to another consumer packaged goods company or to another agricultural operation, another manufacturing operation, in hemp, perhaps another textile company, then we're going to see this normalization of this plant alongside of all of these other industries. And that's when we know that ESG has really taken hold in this industry.
We didn't discuss, or we haven't discussed, environmental policies from a federal standpoint, from a federal legalization standpoint. How does that play into all of this?
Right now, what we're seeing is, for the most part, the EPA is sitting on the sidelines. Most federal agencies are sitting on the sidelines because cannabis is obviously not federally legal, so they're not going to spend money on cannabis companies for the most part, unless there's really egregious criminal activity going on. At the state level, we have this interesting disconnect where with new states that are coming on board, and we'll put California aside because California is a different animal unto itself when it comes to environmental law. But for the most part, you've got, say, cannabis regulators that are out there following whatever the new cannabis regulations are and trying to hold operators accountable vis-a-vis those cannabis regulations. And then you've got environmental laws and regulations and health and safety laws and regulations. Different set of regulators for the most part. And they're sitting on the sidelines. And so I think what we're going to see when we have federal legalization, like every other environmental law, the feds are going to push on the states. Some states have primacy, which means they take control over the implementation and regulation and enforcement under the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, waste laws, and things like that. And if states aren't doing it, then the feds come in and overfile, what's called overfiling, and bring enforcement actions against operators in those states. When we have federal legalization, there's going to be pressure from the feds, the EPA in particular, on the states to enforce environmental laws against cannabis companies. Right now, we don't have that kind of pressure, and I think it's only a matter of time. Even before federal legalization, I think states are starting to wake up. We're starting to see an uptick in state environmental health and safety enforcement against cannabis companies because many of them are out there without any kind of depth with regard to environmental health and safety regulations. They know cannabis compliance really, really well, but most of the environmental or compliance people at cannabis companies don't have deep experience in the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, RCRA, CERCLA, TSCA, Safe Drinking Water Act, the whole panoply of environmental regulation, or even OSHA beyond some limitations around OSHA. So I think you're going to see a lot of pressure around compliance, and you're going to see a lot of enforcement action as cannabis companies start to get under the microscope with regard to these important community-oriented issues as well as environmental issues.
Sure. And when you talk about California being a different animal, I'm assuming you're speaking about Prop 65 in particular, correct?
Prop 65, CEQA, cannabis companies have to go through intense review to get licensed, including environmental review, which isn't necessarily the case in most states. So California is a different animal, much further along. And we're starting to see some enforcement in California already against cannabis companies. A lot of times it's around stream diversions, it's state fish and wildlife enforcement, as opposed to Cal EPA or whatnot coming in and enforcing them.
Would you say that Colorado, which was the first to be out there to legalize cannabis, that they're also a leader on the environmental side as well?
We're not seeing much environmental enforcement against the cannabis companies here in Colorado. And I don't think it's because our companies are necessarily 100% in compliance with environmental health and safety laws. I think it's no different in, say, Pennsylvania or Massachusetts at this point, or any other state where there's cannabis. I think you've got the cannabis regulators knowing cannabis law, enforcing cannabis law, environmental regulators not knowing cannabis companies and cannabis operations sitting on the sideline. I don't think Colorado is any different than any other state right now where that sits.
Okay. All right. Any lawsuits? I know you probably can't get into that, but I'll ask you: any lawsuits or any legal, any other legal issues that are out there that could help change the way the situation is right now for the better?
I think a few things are going to happen. I think the environmental regulators and the health and safety regulators are going to wake up and realize there's a pool of money over there from the cannabis and hemp industry that isn't being tapped. And there's a bunch of noncompliance, which are, frankly, public health and safety issues. And so I think there's going to be enforcement that's going to drive some of that. On the other hand, I also think as companies start to screen for environmental ESG, environmental, social, and governance practices, companies are going to self-identify through those screens that they've got compliance issues. Compliance is a huge part of environmental ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And so you're going to have companies that are going to discover from a compliance standpoint that they're out of compliance. You're going to have enforcement actions. And I think somewhere in between, it's going to move the ball forward so that we have a much more environmentally compliant and safe industry overall.
And you talk about from a monetary standpoint, but I would think that as the whole environmental picture grows and an understanding from companies that it's another job creator, yes? For these companies,
sure. I mean, companies are going to need to hire environmental health and safety professionals that understand this whole other world in cannabis companies. Some large companies have environmental health and safety departments. Most cannabis companies just have a compliance person or two or three or five that aren't necessarily environmental health and safety professionals. They're cannabis compliance people. So there is an opportunity for jobs to go along with getting companies up to snuff with regard to compliance.
Fantastic. So we've been talking to Marc Ross. He's an attorney. He's an ESG attorney with Vicente Sederberg. Anybody out there listening, watching, wants to get a hold of you, the website is the best way?
Website's the best way, VicenteSederberg.com. I can be reached through there. And, I welcome anybody to reach out to me if they are interested in this area or if they're a company that has particular concerns around environmental, social, and governance or environmental health and safety.
Fantastic. Good. Marc, thanks for joining us. Thanks, everybody out there who's been watching the 420 area code. I'm Sheldon Baker, and we'll see you again next time.
Not all hemp oils are created equal. Let Verdant Oasis show you why. Verdant Oasis is a vertically integrated hemp-centric raw material grower, manufacturer, and supplier. We oversee every step from soil to oil. Verdant strains are genotyped and registered by government-regulated seed banks. Our operations are HACCP and GMP certified by SGS International. Verdant Oasis has the most comprehensive global safety dossier for hemp extract, setting the benchmark for FDA acceptance and NDI compliance, the gateway to the food and beverage industry. Our hemp oil ingredients are accepted and authorized by the FDA, USDA, and DEA for interstate commerce throughout the United States. In the UK and EU, our extract is authorized as a novel food. Wholesome and pure, backed by science, legally compliant, and fully integrated with a dedicated innovation center to serve your unique marketing objectives. To learn more about the Verdant difference, visit our website at www.verdantoasis.com. Verdant Oasis, the essence of hemp.